The Conservatives are calling for an investigation into how much health care is received by asylum seekers in Canada. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre says refugee claimants are adding strain to an already overwhelmed system.
6 million Canadians do not have a family doctor. Part of the reason is that mass, out-of-control liberal immigration has overwhelmed the system. And many of those resources are going to people who are here illegally and have been rejected. Will the Prime Minister reverse this policy, support our motion, and put Canadians first for health care?
Canada is not America. Yes, Canada provides essential health care to everyone in this country.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says asylum claims are down more than 30% on his watch. Still, there are currently about 300,000 pending claims. Immigration Minister Lena Diab says Canada has an obligation to provide those people with health care.
We want to still protect those refugees and those people that are claiming the help and need from Canada that legitimately deserves to be protected, including the children. We will continue to do that. We will uphold the constitutional and humanitarian and international obligations that Canada has as a signatory to the UN Convention. At the same time, we will protect the integrity of our immigration system and our visa requirements.
Time now for the Power Panel. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Supriya Dwivedi was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Nathan Cullen is a former NDP MP and BC NDP minister. And Jamie Ellerson is a former Conservative staffer. Hello to you all, and thanks for doing this. Jamie, can I start with you? The arguments are pretty well laid out there, right? We're at the back end of a surge. We're still working our way through it. Is this the kind of, is Pierre Poilievre jumping onto this to try to reverse his polling numbers? Are there real issues that need to be tackled? Where do you stand on what sort of all of this tells us about Canadian politics right now?
Yeah, Peter, I think there's a few things going on here. One, I think it is objectively true that under Justin Trudeau's government, the immigration department lost control of the system, and the ability to process claims in a timely manner is not taking place. I would point out that James Youssef, a former colleague of mine when I worked for Minister Kenny, recently wrote a paper for the C.D. Howe Institute that actually explored the fact that most asylum claimants don't even get a hearing anymore. It's a paper process, and the ability to challenge what asylum claimants are saying to ensure that their claims are credible in and of itself is down. And Canada's acceptance rate is like double that of other like-minded countries. And so I think when you look at what's going on here, it is undeniable that there's an appetite to see the immigration system brought back into a state of balance as it's gotten out of hand. And I think when you look at some of the politics driving this, I think it's undeniable that amongst those who are most vocal with the shortcomings of the current system, you're going to find more of those in the Conservative support group. And so at one hand, the Conservatives are talking to their own supporters. And on another, given everything that Mark Carney is experiencing in the polls at his higher level, this is something where he's got a very weak minister talking on the file. She's been very ineffective in her communications. And I think even if you listen to the quote you just ran, this idea that Canadians who are already here, permanent residents and in the public system, get worse quality healthcare because of some international obligation doesn't pass the smell test. But now when you bring it back to the politics of this, though, Peter, this is where I think this is perhaps a more precarious move, because it's undeniable that the Conservatives are seen as too cozy with U.S. Republicans and the style of politics you see emanating out of the White House. And it is so easy. And you're seeing it all day today with the Liberals kind of playing the values play, just pushing back rhetorically and thinking that they're going to win the message war. And so I think there's a lot going on here, both on the policy front and the politics front.
Supriya, what do you make of what the CBC is trying to do here?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think this is where the tone and tenor and the way you talk about an issue really matters, right? Because on the face of it, the Liberal government obviously agrees in some respects with the main thrust of the Conservatives' point, which is that the current trajectory of the interim federal health program is, essentially off course and isn't really sustainable in the, in the long term. And we know the Liberals agree with this because they introduced a copay, which requires claimants to cover about 30% of the cost of the program, as well as pay a nominal fee for prescription drug coverage, something like $4 or $5 a pop. But the way in which the Conservatives are talking about this right now, they're casting aspersions on, the entirety of the system and accusing liberals, and I'm putting that in air quotes, of rubber stamping asylum seekers as if it was liberal staffers or caucus members that were tasked with assessing asylum claims, right? And then it doesn't exactly take a genius in global affairs or international relations to realize that the last few years haven't exactly been a bastion for global peace. Of course, Canada has seen a rise in asylum claims since, the last few years. We just had the 4-year anniversary of Russia starting their illegal invasion and war in Ukraine. And it's not like things have been smooth in the Middle East and parts of East Africa either. So the conservative contention of this being a liberal manufactured crisis, I think once again, makes them look somewhat unserious and unready for those government benches. And then I just lastly sort of point out that from the IRB's own numbers, they find that, 80% of the general asylum claims tend to be valid, about 20% tend to be rejected. And of those 20%, very few end up actually being fraudulent. The threshold of the language that's used is manifestly unfounded. Very few of those end up being manifestly unfounded. So I'd be very curious to see where the Conservatives are actually pulling some of their numbers from.
But as the numbers, the raw numbers grow, the percentage of people, we are talking about a growing group of people that are being rejected. We saw the deportations reached a record in 2024, and they're already ahead of that this year, and we've only got 3 or 4 quarters to go through it. Nathan, the polling is really clear on this, right? Canadians care about trade, they care about Trump, they care about the cost of living. But just because something's not polling well doesn't mean you shouldn't be tackling it. Is there something? Is this a conversation we should be having, even if you strip out some of the sort of politics of it, for lack of a better word? Or can you?
Super hard to do.
Right.
I mean, Supriya is right. The 2 things can be true at once. That the rate of immigration, the number of people coming in, the system's inability to handle it, well, that's been true before I got into politics 20-something years ago. It got worse. The Liberals have now course corrected and brought that down a bit overall. And Mr. Poilievre's in a lot of political trouble. He is not in a good place. This is not a confident, optimistic, reaching to the next group of potential voters. This is all about back to the base, a little bit about what Jamie was talking about. So I think the tone is way off. It's similar to what Danielle Smith is doing in Alberta, where you've got problems. She's got a big budget problem. Mr. Poilievre has a popularity problem. And reaching for the immigrant card as to the source of those problems and that look over here and I'm your guy does speak to a certain constituency within Canada, but it's not the group of Canadians that are going to bring Mr. Poilievre out of the basement. Well, he's not in the basement, but he's not doing great. He's way behind his party. He's way behind Carney. And it looks a little desperate, to be honest. Even though there may be some substantive things that need to be looked at and addressed, the tone is way off. It echoes so much of what's going on in the US in a bad way. And it's something that Mr. Poilievre has really struggled with. And now he seems to have stepped right back into that trap by his own choice and decision to go after this particular issue at this time when we continue to have so much echo of that very dark side of the conservative movement that we're seeing in the States, and it echoes up here sometimes as well. So while the substance may have some credibility and things to be examined, the tone is angry and blaming and accusatory, scapegoating, all of those things. And that's going to matter. It's going to matter to the second effect Mr. Poilievre, well, probably primary effect he wants, which is to reverse course on how Canadians think about him, particularly those that are not so impressed by him right now.
Emily, it feels like the gap between the substance and the tone is something that Poilievre's office should have known. Anybody could have flagged that for them heading into this, right?
No, it's called a dog whistle. I don't think Pierre Poilievre does not understand how a dog whistle works. I also think that Supriya raised a really important question beyond this specific issue today, that we are in a global migration crisis. It's even very ironic how the top news, even today and yesterday, are about the violence in Mexico. And then there's been an increase of Mexican people coming to Canada fleeing violence, and we're saying that those people might be, and so it's like we're seeing the evidence right in front of us of the insecurity in East Africa, the Middle East, but also in Central America. And we're seeing how those people are being treated by ICE as we speak when they go to the US. And then obviously some people are going to be looking for alternatives to the US. And if we have a right-based world order, it is because refugees are legitimate, and that welcoming people who flee violence is legitimate. And some of the darkest pages of Canadian history have been written about us turning away refugees. Some of our most compelling national museums are about apologizing for the moments in Canadian history where we've turned away Indians or Jews or whoever else showed up in our shores when it wasn't okay in the polls. And it seems like when the world is going through a phase of refugees are all fraud and we need to take care for ourselves as well, we're somehow not connecting the dots. This is not, again, about policy. It's about the tone, and it's also about when there is that tone in Parliament itself, the tone that is unleashed on the intranets, plural, I will say, because all of them, they're so vast, is then absolutely insane. And the last thing I will say is that for those asylum claimants that have been refused who are still in the country, the irony is that some of them are still in the country because their home countries are deemed too unsafe for them to be deported back to. For example, right. Haiti is one of them. And so we have this irony where those people are sought by our system as not refugee enough to be accepted, but somehow too much in danger to be deported. And so when you cut healthcare or basic care to those people, you then very much have in front of you unhumane situation of children not getting care very fast. And we're very quick to condone in Canada those images when they're coming to the US. But we need to understand that if we go down that road, we can be having similar images coming from Canada as well.
Jamie, the way this was going to be seen by people in this country was entirely predictable. I think you could have written a memo about this months ago and explained how people would react to this. And yet, this choice was made. People decided this is what they wanted to do. What does that choice then tell us?
I'm really not sure, Peter. I actually would agree a lot of what you how you just framed that there. I think if this was the Conservatives talking about Canada's proud tradition of welcoming the world's downtrodden, I think of my former boss, this is Jason Kenney's farewell speech in the House of Commons, where he reflected on the fact that Canada's made up of the losers of history, the people pushed by persecution to our shores and welcome to make a new life here. And I think that's a proud tradition that really has had a cross-partisan consensus for the better part of the past 30 years in Canada. And so if you want to go forward with something like this and you want to frame the politics, and especially if you're Pierre Poilievre trying to appeal to people who don't like you right now, I think framing these things as here's what we need to do to restore system integrity and a sense of fairness, but to actually protect the system going forward, I think where you are picking up on, Peter, why this is not going so well for him. Even if you want to have a very specific case and take some of the more extreme rhetoric that we've just even heard, no one's proposing Komogatu Maru 2.0. No one's proposing none is too many 2.0 in terms of some of the more egregious aspects of what we know from our history. But that's where the conversation is. And Conservatives, I don't think, have the bandwidth or the oxygen to actually push back on that kind of stuff because they don't command the attention and aren't in the places where they can actually be able to do that. And so they've lost the debate here on the how people feel about this. Because if we're talking about the raw politics of this, Liberals in Canada enjoy a political advantage on this because they are perceived to be as more kind-hearted and friendly on these issues. And so perception is reality in politics. And I think Conservatives are creating their own predicts here.